The dim slithering of the chains betrayed his awakening, stirring as he tried to touch his chest, which throbbed as if he had been stabbed with a red-hot brand. Ulrim's probing hand came up short. The chains gave just enough room to flex his elbow, but not enough slack to touch his chest, or the heavy collar fastened around his throat. Now he came suddenly and fully awake, wide-eyed desperation crowding in. He was on his knees, back to a wall, and bound by wrist, ankles, and neck. The room was a depthless dark, save an iron brazier a few feet away that bore a heap of coals. They smote the room with kiln-like heat. He licked at his chapped lips, and felt the air threatening to sear his lungs. Ulrim was naked but for a loincloth and the ring on his finger. Odd that it was still there. If he had been captured and caged like some beast, would they not have tried to pry it free? Greater was his surprise at the stitchwork on his leg, where that lance had struck him. The wound seemed to have come a long way towards healing. There was another tight spot on his back. More sewing, he guessed, but little pain. Where was he? Deeper instincts began to surge. An unspeakable fury at being caged simmered. He probed the shadows of the room for signs of who had done this to him, fighting to master himself. Ulrim worked his way to his feet and planted one heel against the wall. He strained, setting all his will, and threw against his bonds. He felt something shift in the wall behind him. He felt a minute shift of the stone, but a promise nonetheless. An unseen door opened and closed. Ulrim growled as padded footsteps drew near. A creature stepped into the low glow of the coals. Something once a man, but now less than human. Its desiccated skin was the color of stained parchment, thin and shriveled. Lank hair hung in patches down the sides of its gaunt head. Over its eyes were 2 silver coins that glimmered in the ruddy light, and its mouth was shrunken tight around jagged yellow teeth. It bore a silver tray heaped with fruit, cheese, and bones heavy with seared meat. The smell of it drove Ulrim half wild. Speaking with the grave's voice, it said, "He wakes."
"Forgive my precautions,"
said a voice to Ulrim's right.
"When I found you, you were a vision of dancing death, covered in blood and black earth, laughing like the damned."
Where before there had been no one, now a tall man stood cloaked in raven dark robes. He threw back his hood, revealing an ancient face lined by a trim silver beard. One eye was missing, and the deep scars around the socket spoke to how brutal the injury had been. His nose was long and sharply boned, seeming more chiseled stone than flesh, and his one good eye held a pale blue ring that gazed on Ulrim with nothing like mercy or humanity. Stillness gathered in the air around him like a storm waiting to break.
"Who are you?"
Ulrim strained against the chains, but the old man did not seem to notice, nor did the creature standing by the coals.
"No begging, no pleading. Exactly as I expected. One does not earn the name Ulrim the Slayer lightly, eh? You know my name?"
Another stone shifted, like a knuckle cracking in the wall behind him. Soon. The old man took a step nearer, unconcerned.
"I know many things, but your name is the least of those. You may call me Zora's Storm Rider."
A storm rider. Ulrim had heard of these old wizards, crazed hermits to some, whispering legends to others. Soothsayers of kings, breakers of dynasties. A fine jam he had landed in. A flicker of a smile passed across Zora's lined face, and was gone. Ulrim had no patience for sorcerers, least of all those that took their amusement as an expense.
"Let's see it then, boy."
Ulrim roared and tore the chain around his left arm free of the wall. A hunk of stone came with it, spraying dust and shrapnel across the room as he whipped the chain across. Zoras flicked a hand up at Ulrim, his eyes now shining with malice. The chain changed in Ulrim's hand. What had been cold, unyielding iron was suddenly slick and scaly. A snake with black diamonds patterned across its scaly back writhed in his grip, coiling painfully around his wrist where the manacle had been. The creature snapped its head up at Ulrich, venom dripping from its grievous fangs that missed his face by a shallow breath. He had been saved by the jarring alarm of the echoes that had, until then, retreated to a distant quiet. Now they brayed for blood. "Gah!" he cried, and dashed the snake against the wall, trying to smite it. Suddenly the chain was bound around his wrist once more. Where the snake's head had struck stone, now was a square plate fixed to the stone. He glowered at it, and then at his captors. The abomination standing behind the brazier had not moved, but a dust and chips of stone clung to its strange, tattered uniform where Ulrich had sprayed it. Zorez gave a trim bow.
"A good trick,"
Ulrich spat. He did not like to be made a fool.
"Are you so smug when your opponents aren't caged? You may wield that ring on your finger, but it is still your master, isn't it? I had hoped for more of an inheritor, but that does not change things," Zorez said cryptically. Ulrich wanted to shout and rave, but he knew it would do no good. He took several breaths. "Speak plainly, or have done and kill me." "Very well, Ulrich the Slayer. Why is it you are here in my cellar, rather than being picked over by vultures with the rest of those savages?" "Because, boy, I have a job for you."
Ulrich narrowed his eyes.
"Call me boy again," he snarled. "You've a fine way of asking a man for his help." "You are no mere man," Zorez chuckled, "and this is no mere task. Will you hear me out?" "Can I refuse?" "Only if you relish those manacles. But I will reward you an equal share when the job is completed."
Ulrich thought about this. He listened for the ghosts. They lurked at twilight periphery of his mind like predators, watching. He felt their judgment like a hard hand on his neck. "Free me, sorcerer, and I will listen." And like that, he was free. He fell to the floor with a suddenness of it. Rubbing life back into his wrists, and then massaging his neck, he looked up.
"Where's my sword?"
he asked. He had no other possessions left in the world. The old man had evaporated without a sound. Only the strange servant remained, watching him with its flat silver coin eyes. After a long moment it rasped, "Would you care to eat?" Ulrich glanced at the thing, but base hunger won out over suspicion. He had not eaten in days. Quick as a raptor, he snatched a beef bone and some cheese, stuffing the latter in his mouth forthwith. Best not let a hand go empty, he thought, and grabbed another hunk of meat. "Please, follow me." The corpse man led Ulrich out of the dark room. Beyond stood a long, high hall with many pillars in beetling shadow. The pillars were graven with numberless symbols and delicate scroll-work, depicting something Ulrich could not fathom. Between the pillars were long, low shelves set with honeycombed shelves of scrolls, stacks of ancient tomes, and countless strange and fragile-seeming trinkets. Many of these moved on their own accord, keeping time to inscrutable beats. Lanterns hung from sconces among the pillars, casting a strange, twilight glow about the place that reminded Ulrich of an ice-locked forest he had once ridden through. Ulrich tossed his scraps on one of the shelves and gazed wonderingly around. The corpse thing stopped at the center of this chamber and turned, one slippered foot scraping over the stone at a time. Slowly it faced him, a face, a mask of shadow, but for 2 coins. "Please," it said, beckoning him to turn around. Suspiciously he complied, but only after snatching another fistful of food. The room shifted and twisted around him. He found himself standing at the foot of a long, thin bridge. At the other end was a huge contraption of metal tubes and rods that stood near a window in the dark wall. Starlight spilled through it, glazing the strange machine with cold light. Beside it was a long table bearing piles of papers and a litter of instruments. Zorez stood hunched over one extrusion of such tubes, his good eye pressed right up against it.
Enough games,
Orym said. Zorez turned to scratch symbols on a sheaf of paper nearby.
Did you hear me, old man? Give me back my sword. It's mine. I won it. Yes, you won it. Yet the proud hawks named you thief.
Orym simmered.
In the lands of my father, a man who takes another's... Be quiet,
Vorez said. The air seemed to disappear from the room, sucking from Orym's lungs. He clutched at his throat with a hand, fighting to draw a breath that would not come. He glared at the sorcerer, refusing to look away.
Give,
he managed, sinking to one knee. Finally the old man cast one good eye over at Orym.
Oh, very well. Your constant demands are tedious as they are hollow. There, on the table, with some other kit you shall need.
And just like that, the air returned. Orym took a ragged breath. On the table, a broadsword he had fought so hard to win appeared amongst the papers. Beside it was a tunic and belt, a sallet helm and greaves of fine make. He pulled these on as the sorcerer spoke, and then took up his sword. It was long as his arm from shoulder to fingertip, the blade almost twice as his hand at the hilt, tapering to a wicked point. The hilt was short, just a little longer than his fist. The pommel was shaped into a curled fist, cut of jade. Brave blade, the proud hawks had named it. A sword of champions, of chieftains. It was wrapped in the sheepskin sheath he had taken from the great chieftain's body, and the broad-shouldered straps were wrapped around it. The plain iron buckle flashed dully.
A drowning man often attacks the man who comes to save him, so desperate is he to stay afloat,
Zorez Stormrider said, tinkering with his contraption.
Are you drowning in all that power?
Orym grunted.
I manage. Hardly, but still you will suffice, and perhaps you will learn. Presently we will travel to a place of power, far from here, into the forgotten depths of the earth. You will guard me as I search for a particular artifact. When we are done, we shall split the reward.
Which is?
To be determined by the success of my search.
Orym's gray eyes searched the old sorcerer's face for clues, for some hint of the man's deeper motives.
Why me? Surely you could have hired a couple hundred swords to guard you, or made thralls of corpses.
Zorez pursed his lips.
My attendant. Such constructs are far too limited. As for hiring a company, a few trained feet can often pass unnoticed where 100 meet a wall. You and I shall suffice.
Orym weighed the words. There was much he was not being told. He sensed it, like a man feels a great fish beneath a river's surface. He burned to be led about with half-truths and vague promises. But what was he to do? Even the ring's echoes were quelled now, cold like embers in the morning, watching, waiting, uncertain. They were rarely aloof. He rolled his broad shoulders and asked,
Then are we to be thieves?
Zorez gave him an evil, empty grin.
Worse, slayer, grave robbers.
He moved away down the bridge. Overhead something began to grate and squeal. The window that looked out on the stars shrank, restoring the deeper blackness. Orym's lips pulled back to bare his teeth. He had known wise men and mystics in his homeland far away. Men who wielded such power, who did not come to face the blade or spear themselves, all became crooked wretches given time. They withdrew to the shadows like spiders, tying knots in the lives of other men for their own ill gain. Was this old crow any different? Orym loped along behind warily. Zorez pushed open a wide door that screeched on neglected hinges. Within was a shallow chamber that bore more resemblance to a chimney than anything else. A circle of white runes had been inscribed on the floor. Some 100 paces above hung a lopsided circle of violet sky, punched through with stars.
We will journey from here,
Zoras said. He turned to face Orym in the center of the circle. Orym hefted the sword in his hand. It was the sum of all his worldly possessions now. He buckled it to his back and glanced up at the sky so far above again. He had buried his father and the last kings of the West. Had their spirits looked up at such skies as he built their cairns?
How? Why do you think they call me a storm rider?